Hello and welcome to the episode 22 of the Community Podcast. My name is Patrick Moser, and together with Brian Olsen and our mascot, talk about everything in the community around the open source, high performance SQL query engine Trino. We talk about big data, query federation, data mesh, object storage, querying, and all sorts of other things. And hopefully, together with us, you can learn something and have some fun diving into all these technical things. Hey, Brian, are you excited as much as I am about our guest today?
For sure. I'm always excited to have one of the giant internet companies joining us to talk about Trino at like ridiculous, crazy scale. Always a pleasure. So welcome all of you. And we'll get a chance, I guess, in a second to get to know each one of you individually.
Yeah, so sounds awesome. So this whole gang is from LinkedIn, and they're all incredibly great contributors to the Trino project, and we'll learn a lot more about that today. So, Akshay, you want to start and introduce yourself a little bit?
Hey, hi folks. This is Akshay. Excited to be here. I'm a staff engineer at LinkedIn. Pretty new to the Trino space. It's been about 8 months, but got to work on a lot of exciting things. Prior to this, I started my journey at LinkedIn, so I've been in this big data platform and open source space. That's mostly it from me.
Awesome. Well, 8 months at LinkedIn with the Trino folks there. That must be a pretty rough deep dive. So awesome. You probably know a lot more than me already at this stage, so that's great. Jitesh, how about you? What are you doing at LinkedIn?
Hey, this is Jitesh. I joined the Trino team at LinkedIn along with Akshay. We both joined together, and I am with LinkedIn for about 3 years now. And prior to this, I was working with the graph database team. So the query engines and all are pretty interesting to me. And it's been very fun and exciting working with the Trino team and getting into the internals of the stuff. Going
awesome.
good.
And both of you, of course, also work with Laura, right?
Hi.
How about you, Laura?
Hi. It's exciting to be here. I'm Laura from joined LinkedIn Trino team about 15, 16 months ago. Nice. And it's so fun to work with both inside the LinkedIn, also with the open source community.
Nice.
Awesome. And then we have Pratham. I know Pratham has been working on Trino a little bit longer from what I understand, because I know he's talking to Martin, Dane, and David now and then, right? Is that true?
Yeah, so I have been at LinkedIn for around 3 years now. And I've been working on Trino and the ecosystem around Trino at LinkedIn. And I've also been spending time in the open source.
Yeah, awesome. I see your comments in Slack and on the PRs and stuff pretty regularly. So
it's exciting
if you dive into the community broadcast, into the Slack channel, you can find his name everywhere. So that's awesome. And then last but not least, of course, Raju, what about you?
Hi there. I'm Raju Nalli, staff engineer working for Trino team at LinkedIn. It's been 3.5 years I've been with the team. I'm responsible for the Trino site reliability. Rest of the site reliability team is not here because we have not hired them yet. So if you or anyone interested, please reach out to any one of us. Not only Trino, many other teams are hiring at LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, we'll get to all those details more a bit later. But yeah, it should be an excellent episode with all of you here and all your knowledge ready to be dispersed.
Yeah, so Raju, I guess that means the entire SRE team for Trino is sitting in that room right now.
Yeah.
the one and only. Oh man, that's always fun being like the one person on the team that has like the intersection for everything for one particular topic.
I'm lucky to have the rest of the team. They are also take part of my responsibilities. They are also share site reliability responsibilities.
Nice.
Awesome.
Well, Manfred, before we hop into all the fun things that we have to talk about today, definitely going to be diving into the LinkedIn story. But before that, let's hear a quick word from the sponsors. Yeah.
Sure.
I'm Colleen Tarto. I am the Director of Engineering on Starburst Galaxy.
what is it actually offering? So, I mean, I think this kind of like builds on some of the open source Trino stuff, but is it doing a lot more? What kind of pains is it solving? Could you kind of give us a little bit of insight on what actual pain this is going to be alleviating?
Yeah, absolutely. And so to think about that, I always like to go back and think about what's the difference between Starburst Enterprise and Trino, right? And so I always like to think of Starburst Enterprise as the cool older sibling to Trino. It's a little bit more mature, a little cooler. It's got a car. It's got some cool stuff going on, leather jacket, you know. And Trino is awesome in its own right, don't get me wrong, but Starburst Enterprise is just better and a bit more grown up. And specifically what that means to me is that with Enterprise, you get more functionality, faster performance, more connectors, more security, better management, better integration into the ecosystem of tools that you already use today, data governance, integration, et cetera, et cetera. But what really speaks volumes to me is that when you use Starburst Enterprise, you get Starburst, right? You get best-in-class support from the folks who work for us, and they know Trino best because they created Trino, and they're continuing to contribute to Trino. But Starburst Galaxy takes that to a whole nother level, right? So one of the pain points is installing, managing, maintaining, monitoring Starburst Enterprise. And so Starburst Galaxy alleviates all of that, right? So it's a fully managed service. It's Starburst Enterprise as a managed service and more.
And one last question, is there going to be any free offerings coming up anytime soon? Is that on the road?
Absolutely. We're building out, we've got a free trial. So if you're interested, absolutely reach out to us. We are very excited about it. And then we're talking about sort of a free tier. So like being able to just play around with it in your own environment and see what's what.
We'll keep you all up to date on when you can start to play around with Galaxy and Trino for free for just a little bit and get to know this incredible service called Starburst Galaxy. Thank you so much, Colleen.
Thank you.
All right. So welcome back. And yeah, basically I wanted to just showcase, we got our UX UI designer who created Commander Bun Bun, Ali Loney, to create a fun little image that, by the way, you can see in the show notes. We have a little Commander Bun Bun here getting ready to apply for a job using LinkedIn here. So we like to do these for a couple of the shows, and so now we have one a fun little image that we can use for LinkedIn. So
I think that's Jitesh's office there.
Yes, exactly. This is Jitesh going in and getting ready for his. I guess this was him before he went into LinkedIn, right? Maybe not currently looking. Anyways.
Yeah, I think it's also in the spirit of work from home. Like it's 30 and he's still at home.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's hard to say. So we were debating if we made it an office. Actually, I was talking to Ali about that whenever we were putting it together. I was like, well, you know, most people just kind of are stuck at home. But like, you know, if anything, we should have put him in like wearing underwear, and then he was just wearing like the suit on top. But anyways, take a look at that. The images in your show notes if you're listening to this on the podcast. Cool. So Manfred. We aren't quite getting to the release yet, right? We're approaching, I would say, 360 at this point, right?
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be next week at this stage, given that it's already Thursday. But it is definitely coming, and a whole bunch of stuff has been merged already. So there's a couple of things that I want to sneak peek at for you all. Interestingly, at least sort of 3 of them are like flashbacks to prior episodes. So the first one I wanted to mention is that the automatic cluster internal TLS, where I was talking about how Dane had to dive into the depths of like certificate management and automatic certificate generation and work with the Jetty folks and stuff like that. That was going to come in 359, and then we didn't ship it because there was actually a tiny bug, like super edge case in Google Choose Depths. So David had to help Dane, which is like, oh my God, Dane needs help from someone. And of course, David stepped up. And so they got that sorted. So that's shipping now. So that's going to be super awesome. I'm contributing my little tiny part by writing the documentation, but that doesn't really count.
Tiny part is huge. That's everybody's been saying we need more docs these days. So don't underplay that, Manfred.
Yeah. Okay. So related to that, I do have some good news. We had the episode with Anjali about the materialized views. I wrote all the state the SQL statement syntax now so that you can actually look up how to write those down and don't have to dive into the show notes from the Trino community broadcast. So that's definitely also merged. So that's good. And the Iceberg connector, also related to the Iceberg connector, it has views support now. Remember in our views episode how we talked about all this complexity about Hive views and Trino views and native views underneath and materialized views in the Iceberg connector. Well, the Iceberg connector at least now has materialized views and normal Trino views. So that's pretty awesome. And then last but not least, even though Trino is a SQL query engine that's optimized for reading, more and more users are starting to use it also for writing data. And so we added a bunch of features relating to deleting and batch inserting data in numerous JDBC-based connectors. So that's coming in as well. So that's going to be offering quite a bit of a performance improvement for those cases where you do write. So that's going to be cool as well. And there's lots more changes, but enough cheating. I think we should jump on to the next topic.
All right. So we'll definitely hear more about that 360. I'm also hoping to sneak in something that actually Pratham's been so kind to be looking over, one of these Elasticsearch changes that I've made, and it's touching a lot of cool things that people have been requesting. So really excited about that, and hopefully I'll make it in by the end of the hour before 360 gets released. So. Before that, let's talk about Trino Summit. So we've been, kind of a little scattered about this whole topic, and I know that there's been a little bit of confusion around the community because we announced it a while back when we were just planning on having it be a virtual summit, and so things have obviously changed since then. We decided to move this into a hybrid event, and so basically we're going to have a small amount of people showing up at the live part of the event, and so that registration and everything is available now. We are, I think, taking the number is right around 100 or so, like just a little over 100 live participants. But if you obviously are unable to attend, just obviously this is going to be in the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco, California. So obviously there are still a lot of things going on in the world with COVID and everything where this will probably limit some people, but we still have the event open to virtually if you are unable to attend for any reason. And all that information is going to be available on the link that we have here in the show notes, bringing you to this announcement. So originally we had said that this was going to be a September 15th event, and that ended up overriding with Yom Kippur. We didn't want to make this an exclusive event or disclude anybody based on the holiday that they are celebrating. So we moved this actually to a month later on October 13th. And so all the information, if you click here, you can actually open up the registration page. And so here, if you plan on coming to the live event, click on the live button, and you'll require a proof of vaccination if you do want to attend live. Otherwise, click on the virtual, sign up for virtual, and if you want to speak at the event, we still have, I think, 1 or 2 slots left available. There's open call for papers until August 15th. So even if you don't, if you sign up for the call for papers and you don't get your talk in to Trino Summit, we will probably end up bringing you into a meetup or something like that. Or if it's, if you don't mind waiting for, basically 8 months to a year or so, we could even look at getting you into the next Trino Summit, depending on the nature of your talk. So a lot of really exciting things coming down the way there. So obviously let us know any questions that you have. Come find me on Slack, find me on Twitter at bitsondatadev, and let me know if you have any issues or questions with signing up. I know there was one issue with people signing up with their Gmails. There was a setting that we needed to get fixed, and so you don't need a company email to sign up for this event. That was a mistake that we had made on the initial sign up. So that is resolved. You can sign up if you are a student or anybody who doesn't work at a company right now. Okay, so that being said, get excited for that. I also wanted to take a quick moment as Pratham, do you want to take a quick moment to talk about some of these positions that are available? It's I think 2 positions that you had sent to me, or Laura. I'm not sure who is going to be talking about this segment.
Laura, probably you can take it up.
Oh, Sure. So LinkedIn is hiring, and also Trino team is hiring. So we have shared 2 links here for software engineer and the senior software engineer positions. If you are interested, please check it out, and or just send us a note.
Awesome. All right. Well, with that, here, let me move to this other view here. So with that, I think we're going to be moving on to the concept of the week. All right. So now let's pull up. Let me see. We want to pull up actually. I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get right here in a second. There we go, Laura. Thanks for coming on the show, and you're gonna be particularly kind of telling us how Trino has been used, I guess, historically throughout the time that it's been at LinkedIn, and kind of some of the use cases, right? What kind of ways? What are the ways in which Trino is being used? Is it going to be exposed to different clients? What are all the kind of ways in which, or is there more internal use cases that are driving the usage, or a little bit mix of both? Tell us what are some cool things going on at LinkedIn using Trino.
Thanks, Brian. This team has a lot to share today, but first I want to start with how Trino is used in LinkedIn and how much it has grown in the past years. So in the past year, Trino has experienced tremendous growth in LinkedIn. We have seen 5,000 unique users to Trino over last year, including 2,000 users query Trino on a weekly basis. Also, data processed by Trino has more than tripled since 2020, and reaching 30 quadrillion rows or 400 petabytes per month.
Wow.
So it's a huge amount of data.
That's crazy. I'm actually kind of curious, the users, are they like a lot of internal LinkedIn users, or is this actually like so I use LinkedIn. Am I using Trino in the background when I'm pulling up different charts or doing different reports?
Very likely.
Yeah.
In Trino, in LinkedIn, Trino has many diverse use cases. We have data engineers using Trino to build products for our customers. And we have researchers using Trino to conduct economic research on LinkedIn's data. Or we have system engineers using our analytics infrastructure to analyze their system performance. Then on the business side, Trino has fully replaced Teradata inside LinkedIn for the typical business reporting to understand the business performance and activities, or people use it for product research to make data-informed decisions and use it for customer service to investigate user issues. So you have been hitting Trino behind the scene.
Nice. Okay. So is this particularly on the user side, from my perspective, is this hitting on a lot of the real-time use cases with Trino? Like, I know there's I think you guys use Pino or some sort of real-time system. Is Trino also sitting on top of those systems and actually pulling that out for the users, or what are the kind of use cases that you see in real time versus batch analytics?
Yeah. So it's a kind of a mixed. So there is a lot of diversity I talked about, but overall we can categorize them into 3 different types of Trino workloads inside LinkedIn. So first is application workloads. These applications can generate queries for their customers automatically. So one click in this application will trigger multiple templated queries hitting Trino. Because of these automatic nature, they have relatively higher QPS requirement to Trino, and also sometimes high CPU usage. Trino is becoming more and more mission critical to these applications because they could have service outage if Trino is down or Trino is slow in responding. So our goal here is to provide provisioned performance and HA to our application users.
Very cool.
You also mentioned another type of workload is scheduled batch flows, right?
Yeah.
So we have noticed an emerging use case pattern from our business users, especially. they first start with issuing some interactive queries and verify this flow, that it will work. Then they will schedule them to run it daily or weekly, monthly. So batch jobs are usually very big consumers for system resources. In the past, we had a lot of challenge in accommodating these big ETL jobs, but reliable support from Trino is also critical for our business users because they depend on us to generate their monthly reporting, refresh, or some dashboards for those cases.
Is there do you take when it comes to like the batch stuff in particular, like, you know, there's typically kind of a line that you draw between something that Trino is more apt to handle, something like let's say is maybe at the worst case like an hour turnaround, and then you have like you know, some types of work or batch jobs that are going to take, you know, are really one of those like scan everything type jobs. Do you guys see that you have to kind of split those batch jobs into like a Trino type of workload versus a traditional like data warehousing type of job? Do you guys do that kind of a split, or is Trino pretty much handling almost all of your batch?
Inside LinkedIn, there's other engines handling majority of the batch, but as I said, this is the emerging use case for us.
Got it. Okay.
From Trino side. Yeah.
Okay, so that's you kind of define like something like a quick, more ad hoc style batch process versus
First
something.
Start with ad hoc, then converting to batch. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, got it. That makes sense.
And I also want to add our last but very important workload type is our thousands of interactive ad hoc users. They just want fast and easy to use analytics infrastructure that just works.
Yeah.
So this is very important that Trino, important role that Trino plays in LinkedIn.
Nice. What was I going to say? Are these like handled over different clusters usually? Like, do you usually just segment a cluster for a different type of workload, or multiple clusters for different workloads, I guess?
We're currently in the process of doing some workload isolation, and we're testing and experimenting what works best for our customers and with the best performance.
Okay.
So yeah, it has a lot of interesting things going on in LinkedIn's Trino team. We have a lot to carry to support this analytics at this large scale, but it's also fun to work on a scalable engine in an ecosystem that demands such large scale, right?
Fair.
Yeah, if you're interested in LinkedIn or LinkedIn's Trino service, you can check out our job posting there.
For sure. So I think when we get into kind of like segmenting the workload, like this might be something that kind of hits more into Raju's section, like where he's kind of figuring out how to segment those. So Raju, did you want to talk a little bit about how you scale up these different workloads, or?
Yes. So as Laura mentioned, we have seen massive growth and adoption of Trino at LinkedIn in the last 3+ years, which introduced us to operational challenges and scaling challenges. We have some majority of the users are ad hoc and some batch workloads, and we do have it's like experimental right now, batch cluster for batch workloads.
Oh, so you have a dedicated cluster for that?
Yeah.
Yes, some of the batch workloads go there. Yes.
Okay, cool.
I can talk about like other operational and hardware related challenges that.
Yeah, maybe give us an idea of like what sort of machines you have in those clusters, how big those clusters are.
Sure.
If you do the distribution between batch and others, what kind of like how users decide what cluster to work on, if there's something, or if you have some sort of load balance in front of it. Maybe also what data sources you have. Those things would definitely be interesting for all of us, I'm sure.
Sure. So the primary data source is HDFS, which is in hexabyte scale. Our HDFS with thousands of nodes. The Trino is also in thousands of nodes, multiple clusters, geographically distributed clusters.
Oh, wow.
As of today, Trino is all bare metal hardware. We share Trino workers with HDFS data nodes. Basically, the storage on the nodes is allocated to HDFS and most of the compute and memory is used by Trino. We can go compute only Trino nodes, provided the top of the rack switch bandwidth supports it. So based on our analysis, we can't, our top of the rack switch can't support. Once we have the enough bandwidth, we can definitely go compute only for Trino workers.
So just for those that don't use Trino that much also, so when you say HDFS, that means Hadoop file system, which means you're using the Hive connector, is that correct?
Yes.
What are you using as your metastore for all the data then?
Sorry?
What are you using as the metastore for the data? You just have a custom Hive metastore?
Hive metastore. And yeah, we have some layer on top of that, Dolly.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
What is Dolly?
I think data access at LinkedIn. It's an internal thing.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Your local way to make it easier. Nice.
So, and these Trino workers, we stripe them across HDFS racks. So we don't put all Presto workers in a single rack and choke the network bandwidth on the top of the rack. And also better data locality. We stripe the Presto workers across HDFS racks. We are seeing about 65% data locality if we combine data rack and node level locality. We have seen improved performance because of that, and we are able to achieve sub 10-second latencies, average query latency for Trino. For analytical engine, that's very impressive latency for queries. Some of the queries scan trillions of rows. I've seen that. And
so let me get this straight. What you're saying is you are deploying on bare metal machines. So I want to talk about that later. But those bare metal machines have storage on them. HDFS storage is on them, and then you run the Trino workers on it. And because Trino and the Hive connector know about data locality, if a query accesses the storage on that node where a Trino worker happens to be, it can read directly rather than some other worker needing to read it via the network. It reads it right off the disk, basically, right? Is that what's
Yeah. So Trino has a SPI which fetches the data location, a block location from the name node. The coordinator schedules the tasks and splits based on the location of the blocks. So it tries to give preference to the node if it happens to have that block. Next level is rack level. If any other node on the same rack has the block, it will give preference to that. That reduces the bytes transmitted across the racks, basically. Reduces the number of bytes being transmitted between the racks.
Yeah, that's very cool. It's a not so typical deployment anymore these days, because more and more users like go in a database or so, or have data stored on S3 or whatever, where obviously you can't, because like that belongs to the cloud operator. But in your case, if you have full control over the stack where you own the storage and the workers and all on the hardware, that's really cool.
Absolutely.
So when you're saying you are running on the bare metal, what does that mean in terms of operating system, and how do you get the Trino clusters there installed? Like, what do you use to provision the workers and stuff?
Sure. So we use the Linux, Red Hat Linux, and we use Salt and Jenkins to do the Trino deployment, Trino binary and conf deployment, and also some auxiliary and automation scripts as well. We use Salt to do the deployment.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Just wanted to finish the previous thought. So most of the Trino now, Trino workers are busy on CPU, but recently we have encountered situation that queries are slow, but their CPU is not as busy. And further investigation found out that we are saturating on the network. That's at a node level network bandwidth. So then we, as you said, like we own the stack, and we found some nodes have higher network bandwidth. So we shuffled the nodes, gave the higher bandwidth nodes to this particular cluster, which is network bound, and we have seen 3x query latencies improvement.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you have control over that, and also importantly, as an SRE,
Yes.
you need to do a lot of measuring to understand what's going on, and then you can react. So that's very cool.
Right. Yeah, and like other things are like we are the first big data team at LinkedIn who moved to JDK 11. That's due to Presto 333 prerequisite. After moving to JDK, we have observed the reduction of GC pauses significantly, and frequency of node crashes also reduced, and observed about 13% query latency improvements.
Yeah. No, the upgrade to JDK 11 or Java 11 was definitely a very good one. It's also not touching you as much because you're running on bare metal, but it also has a significant performance for people that run on container infrastructure. So
yeah,
it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, there's also a lot of. I mean, I'm really excited. I've heard a couple of things with the next JDK bump that we're going to be doing to 17 when it comes to like performance increases and capabilities to even. This is like, if you're really trying to go like pedal to the metal is if you're trying to do the actual like instructions like computer basically SIMD instructions. So. Having that capability is going to be nice, I think, in maybe certain niche particular use cases, but for those niche ones that are like where speed is critical, having that capability in Java is going to be pretty neat.
Yeah, Java 17 is the next LTS. So the latest available long-term support version of Java is 11. That's what we're on at the moment. And 17 is coming out. I think it's scheduled to come out in September. It's like in a ramp down phase. So it's the next upcoming release. So well, it should be interesting.
Yeah, a lot more work to do. That's for sure.
So there's another thing I would like to share with the community. We've learned that a freshly restarted Trino cluster, queries run much faster on the freshly restarted cluster. So because of that reason, we can't restart the cluster and have a downtime. So what we came up with is Trino allows you to do graceful shutdown of nodes. So we do that every hour, look at the uptime of workers. If their workers' uptime is over 24 hours, we restart them gracefully without impacting any queries. We only restart like 5% maximum per hour. So that is basically reduced the long-running JVM related issues as well, and query latencies are also pretty stable, even if the cluster is up for extended period of time.
Nice.
Yeah, that's easily possible if you have a large cluster with thousands of machines to restart 5%. If you have a small cluster of 10 machines, it gets a bit trickier.
Yeah, well, definitely one of those things that you could do at scale for sure. But it is a really cool trick. It's just definitely something like, wouldn't we something at scale we'd want to like as a community we'd want to rely on. But it is interesting to think about for our larger scale users that they can think to apply something like that, especially like those financial companies that over in New York. That's like if they're wanting speed and not wanting to have these like slowdowns due to all of the backup in the JVM. that's a huge benefit right there. So cool.
So earlier Manfred was asking about how we build or expand clusters, which cluster to expand. So we do have a event listener dump and many internal graphs that we look at. We ingest metrics like every minute, look at their CPU usage, user growth, based on various factors like cluster level CPU usage, cluster level bytes read, rows read, and the query latencies. We look at all these metrics. Based on that, we expand clusters, or sometimes we have to build new clusters if the coordinator happens to be the choking point.
So when you're saying in event listener, do you have a custom event listener that wrote, or you're just using the GMX metrics and the GMX connector or something else? Or even just the REST API with...
So we do have a JMX metrics collection, which is written in Java. And we also have a Kafka event listener, I think that's custom built, that ingests like Presto query completed event, Presto split completed event events. And those again land on HDFS, and we use Presto to query, Trino to query. We need to rename that. I guess we still call it a Presto query completed event. We have
yeah, don't get me started about renaming things.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, that was actually a lot of my question too. Was kind of like how much out of the box metrics are you all using, and then like is there for your telemetry and kind of their ability to kind of make these like automated decisions? Like, is it mostly driven by internal stuff that you've created, or is it a lot of out of the box stuff that you find useful as well?
I think maybe Pratham has some more knowledge on that. Probably he can.
Yeah, let's Pratham.
Hey, yeah, so I think, so this was actually one of the points I was going to cover, but I can talk about it now.
Well, yeah.
So when it comes to metrics, I think whatever Trino emits through JMX, like also on the REST endpoint, the same thing in one of the connectors, I think that is pretty rich in itself. And like a lot of those things are just about how Trino is doing, like how the queries are doing, but it also emits metrics around external components. Like for example, if you are using Hive connector, then like it would tell you, for example, what is the name node latency looking like from the Trino side. So like you don't need to go and ask a different team about like what is the latency. Like you could just observe it on Trino side, and I think that is very powerful. Like similar to like all the like I think you have similar stuff in all the other connectors as well.
Yeah.
So other than that, like if you are looking into, let's say, performance of a specific query, I believe the query info JSON that we have, which you can find on the query details page, that has a lot of interesting information that can help you debug what is going on. Like for example, it also gives you whether like what is the delay in getting the splits, like what does that distribution look like.
Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, is there like when it comes to how you typically come up with what metrics or what things you need to be looking for that are important? Because we get this question in Slack all the time. Like, once an individual has kind of figured out where to find JMX and how to kind of find the query information, I think there's still a bit of a bit of mystery around how do you actually take a lot of that telemetry information and channel it into some sort of usable metric to either make decisions like Raju was kind of mentioning before, or particularly, find out, at least just, be able to at the very baseline, debug some issue that's going on. And so at LinkedIn, I mean, how do you typically go about, like, when it comes to debugging something? Is there general process that you all have on the team about where to look first and kind of, or how to pull out those metrics, or what metrics to pull on first to kind of get your head around an issue going on in production?
Yeah, so I think at the high level, an important question to ask is like whether you want to debug something at an aggregate level, or you want to drill down into like what a specific query is doing.
Okay.
So if you observe a common pattern with a lot of queries, then you know that you can easily reproduce that issue. So then in that case, it's better to see like where the query is spending time.
Okay.
And I mean, in Trino, a lot of things happened in a pipeline manner. And also like the split loading and query execution, they can happen in parallel. So at those times, I think it's useful if you add all this debugging information inside of the query info that we are getting, and see if those numbers make sense to you, or whether those numbers actually match your expectations.
Gotcha. I think. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, but like if that is something aggregate, like for example, that like even after all the splits are scheduled, you see the scans taking a long time, then you could start by thinking like what affects those scans.
Gotcha.
And then you can choose whether you want to put metrics on the calls that you make to external systems, and they can be aggregate.
I think we jumped ahead a little bit in terms of what I think somebody else is going to be covering a lot of this stuff, so I don't want to get too heavy into the weeds here. I would like to take a quick step back and kind of think about, well, first, before we hop on, Raju, did you have anything else you wanted to cover about like scaling things up operationally, or before we hop off and to talk to Pratham?
Sure. I'm almost done, but I just want to add what Pratham was saying, just answer your earlier question. So these metrics do evolve based on sometimes, like, let's say there is a problem or an issue that we encountered. While investigating, we have to collect more metrics. Like, for example, which user is consuming the most amount of CPU? We have, as Pratham mentioned, an aggregate level, but now we want to do it at a user level. And sometimes, like, we have custom UDFs, and some of the UDFs are not utilized, but we are still maintaining. Like, why don't we have a metrics on them, which UDFs are not being used, custom UDFs. So some of these metrics do evolve based on the challenges we face.
That's a good point too, to actually say, like, especially when it comes to your own time and energy as a team, how do we save ourselves time? It's not even like a production issue where most of our minds are when we're thinking of the gathering metrics and just understanding the health of the system. No, like, it's also the health of how your team is spending time too. Yeah.
So about the metrics, actually, that's something that I wanted to talk anyway. LinkedIn metric collection, not just at Trino, but it's evolved at OS level. So we do have a OS level metric collection that comes by default, no matter whether you're Trino or some other team. The OS metric collection takes care of OS level metrics for CPU, IO, network, memory, you call it. Like, most of the metrics are covered, and they are evolved over a period of time, contributed by many teams. Again, Trino specific metrics, we heavily rely on the event listener dump. We use these metrics to build expand clusters. Sometimes we build clusters not only based on the just the scale related challenges. We also build them based on use cases, like, for example, test clusters. And what's next for especially in site reliability engineering is to work on bring Trino onto Kubernetes, Trino onto Azure VM scale sets, maybe Trino on Azure AKS. That's I think Azure Kubernetes service.
Yep. Yeah. So you're currently on bare metal, but the idea is that you do want to at least have maybe even just a hybrid for the time being, and then is the goal to be totally on the cloud, or it's not sure yet?
So I think Laura touched on like building some kind of query gateway. So once we have that, initially our thought process is to have both bare metal and some virtual, like could be containerized or virtual machine based, and let the gateway do the migration slowly into the cloud.
Got it.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Okay. Well, great. Raju, anything else you wanted to cover before we hop on to Pratham, talk to him a little bit about kind of development?
No, that's it.
Awesome. All right. Thank you very much. So Pratham, we already kind of hit a little bit on like some of these more custom type of like event listeners and things like that. Like, what's the current like experience around like the development and operating at scale at LinkedIn, and in particular, how do you all kind of contribute into like get a lot of the stuff you're developing at LinkedIn, and how does that kind of make its way? I know it to some level it has with like Coral and some other fixes that have come through. What's the process around that, and what's the experience like on your team?
And stepping back, what version are you even on?
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, so we are on Trino 352 right now.
Oh wow, very new. That's cool.
Yeah. So actually, that's something that we try to consciously practice. That we want to do like sustainable internal feature development. So like most of the companies, including LinkedIn, like we typically have internal use cases that would require us to implement features inside of Trino or around Trino. And ideally, like you would like to do it in open source, because then you get to have feedback from people who have been working on that for a long time.
Yep.
And you can develop the feature more robustly. But a lot of times, to meet internal deadlines or to make the features available faster for our users, like we may end up implementing that feature internally. But I think in those situations, as a Trino admin, it's important to make sure that like you don't keep adding tech debt. In the sense that like sometimes if the feature is very intricate and it touches a lot of different engine components, then it is possible that the next time you upgrade, like all the open source code around that feature has changed.
Yeah.
And it's very possible that you end up rewriting the whole feature almost. And it's possible that if the code has changed so much, like it can be hackier the second time you implement it. And you need to keep paying this cost for every internal feature that you add every time you upgrade. So I think something like that can discourage you from upgrading as frequently as you would like. So I think what we try to practice is to be mindful about making those changes. So for a lot of features, I think the plugin framework that Trino has, that comes in very handy. Because like if you are just adding a feature that is about adding a function, or you could add something in one of the access control plugins, for example, those changes, they don't need to be aware of what is happening in open source, because the Trino SPI, that is very stable and it doesn't change much. And whenever there are changes, usually it's backward compatible.
Yeah.
So that is fine, but a lot of times the features may include making changes to the engine. Like, and at that time, I think it's important that we have this discussion early on in the process in the open source community, that whether a feature like this can be helpful for others in the open source as well.
Yeah.
And even if the whole feature is not helpful, maybe it can be broken down into multiple parts, where one part can live in the engine and the second part can be a plugin, which can be internal implementation.
Do you find that some of the feedback from the open source drives your decision making internally at LinkedIn in terms of how you're going to either implement a feature or how you'll if you're ultimately going to go that direction? Does that happen with you guys as well?
Yes, definitely. So I think it's a win-win. It's for our own good. Like if we don't consider open source feedback, then we will just add that thing with a design that is not going to be accepted in open source.
Yeah.
And like we need to spend more efforts the next time we upgrade.
I really like the way that you framed essentially like internally maintained changes at LinkedIn as tech debt. Like that's, I think for some people that's, it's very common for a lot of companies to just basically say, yeah, we're going to take open source, we're going to like add whatever we need to it, and then we're not going to contribute it back because it's either maybe the idea that you want to have something proprietary or this. But the way that you've defined it is you're saying you're basically just adding work to your engineers and basically wasting their time. And more or less, is there a case or are there cases, and you don't have to actually enumerate what the case is, but like, are there cases that you see where it's actually still a benefit to kind of have that proprietary, or kind of like don't put this back into open source right away kind of thing? Or do you think that for the most part you've seen that it's just much more beneficial in the aggregate to get things back to open source if possible?
I think it depends on the nature of the change and like how much effort it is to actually upgrade. So like for some of the changes that we have internally, they don't make sense for the open source. But then like it's on us to kind of design them in such a way that it remains easy to upgrade in, like easy to rebase in future. So like, for example, you would want to define clear interfaces, or like make sure that it doesn't touch a lot of different components of the engine.
Got it.
But a lot of times what we work on are performance improvements. So like everyone likes that.
Yeah. I don't think anybody's going to contest like, what, you're going to make this faster?
Yeah. So like, for example, the last year we worked on improving the performance of queries on nested data.
Yeah.
And like that was also a big change. And we initially started developing that in open source, like gathering feedback from all the people that work on that side. And like once we had confidence that, okay, this is the right approach, like we ended up deploying those changes internally first. And like our workloads ran with it. And after a couple of releases, it got merged. But the good thing is like the next time we upgraded, we did not have to carry all that around. And we could just rely on the source code in open source.
Yep.
So I think related to that, it's also like, I think one thing that's very important to understand, what I really like, is you're thinking of regularly upgrading, because that's what drives you to have that deck that small, but also get you access to new features all the time. And that is also, I think, related to one of the other very useful and great contributions you have that Brian sort of touched on sort of like tangentially before, and that is Coral. So can you tell us a little bit about what your role is with Coral, what you do with it, and maybe like who even maintains that? Is that you, or is that a different team at LinkedIn, or how does that work?
Yeah, so Coral was developed as a part of the DALI team that Raju briefly mentioned. And right now it's the same way. So like we just use Coral as one of the libraries. That got integrated in open source Trino last year, but we have been using it just similar to that in LinkedIn for a couple of years.
And just for those that don't know, Coral is a sort of like translation layer, and in Trino it helps with running Hive views.
We'll cover it a little bit more on the question of the week, Manfred. Anyways, yeah. So I mean, that's definitely really cool. And did this actually? Did Coral actually start out as kind of something that you used internally, and you kind of had the same view where you're like, okay, if we don't like, let's first see. I guess I'm actually just kind of curious to understand what the evolution was with that project, and did you talk with somebody and they said, oh well, that's something I need too, or do you know any of the history and the details of how that? I'm not sure how involved you were with the Coral project actually. So, but do you know anything about that? How that unfolded and got into the open source?
I have some idea. So actually, like when I was an intern at LinkedIn, like there was an engineer who was working on Coral, the translations, and like I was one of the first users of Coral.
Nice.
I wanted to like get an idea of like what the workload would look like on Presto if we moved like all the Hive workload to Presto.
Yeah.
So the ownership was to a different team, and like we open sourced it primarily because it is something very useful that like other companies also want, not just to make sure that it's not an internal change that Trino team has.
Yeah.
And, it has a much broader scope than that.
Gotcha. Very cool. Let's see. So
and yeah, actually, like on the point of open source, like overall, I feel that like the maintaining continuous collaboration with the open source has helped us a lot in terms of like keep moving in the right direction and not get stuck at like an old version. And I think it's also kind of in the spirit of open source that like if you keep using the old version, that then you are not really leveraging what other 500 people are working on and like all their features.
Totally. I'm kind of curious, what has like as maybe a company and maybe your own personal experience, Pratham, like what has been the experience that you've had kind of being a part of the community? I know that now it's been since you were, so you talked about when you were an intern, and I'm guessing that's right around the time where you really started to get involved with the Trino project, right? So I'm just curious, like, what's that experience like, and what was it like to get LinkedIn to kind of be on board with, like, now you're kind of in this maintainer role, and you are you all are at LinkedIn are very much in tune with that. Like, what was the journey there? Could you talk a little bit more about that and the experience?
Yeah, sure. So overall, I think it's a great learning experience, if you would want to summarize it, because like it's good to be able to engage with people who are not in your company, but like they are kind of experts of the domain. And like if you talk about like the timeline, I think we have been partnering with Martin, David, and Day even before PrestoSQL was a thing. So it has been a long journey, and now it's like the whole workforce, not just Martin, David, and Day.
Yeah.
So like it moves even at a faster pace. So sometimes it's more like catching up on reviews all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that's why we have the show, and we try to have Manfred summarize it, but even even that doesn't really do it justice, does it?
Yeah, now and then you get these reviews. Like, I just recently got a review for some documentation about from a new feature. I'm like, oof, this is going to be a complex one again.
I had to do a lot of research just to understand what these words mean.
Exactly.
Yeah. So okay, so I mean, that's great. Like, definitely have the overall thing. Now, when you the overall idea of how you guys have interacted, but like what version were you on, I guess, before we were moved into the current version of Trino? Like, you said you were at 333, or was there a version you were on before
yeah,
you
it
made
was
that
333.
333, and that was the pre-JDK 11 requirement. Is that why you guys kind of got held up there for a while?
So actually, like, we were going to upgrade it before that, but like we were also working on some Iceberg connector changes.
Okay.
And like we wanted that to get in the open source first, because the timelines there were not very strict for us. So we were just waiting for it to get merged. And then in December, the change happened from Presto to Trino. So we were like, okay, this is a good opportunity to just like change everything to Trino and then upgrade.
Yeah, I'd like to actually bring up Akshay real fast. Hello, Akshay. Yeah, I think you have a little bit of background into kind of some of the issues that you all were facing, I guess, in kind of doing this migration. Would you mind kind of going over a little bit of those challenges?
Yeah, sure. Like, I think as Pratham was mentioning, we were on Presto 333, and it had been over a year since we were due for our next upgrade. And the kind of rebranding effort that happened in open source kind of pushed us to do it sooner than later. The longer we wait, the more unknowns we have. So with a year, we were behind 19 releases, and there were more than 3,000 commits upstream. So this, in essence, this upgrade was, not just a major upgrade in terms of the number of changes that we had to do, but also the rebranding and renaming and giving, the users a different idea of, what Presto is now.
Nice.
So with all these changes, I think, it's very important to extensively test everything. At our scale, there's so many variety of query shapes, and it's almost impossible to test all of them. But the two things that kind of definitely helped was, one, the upstream Trino maintains these product tests, so they kind of cover most of the cases that we have. And then even if something is not working well, it's very likely that you can just enable or disable portion of that feature through session properties, and we can still recover whatever we want to work with and go ahead with the upgrade. So these like the changes were massive, and in addition was the rebranding, which is we need to give our users a very consistent experience of Trino, right? So that needed us to consistently communicate with users about this change, bring them up to speed, update any references on documentations, other products that talk to Trino, and give a consistent view of things.
How did that work out? Like, was it very challenging? Like, obviously, the upgrade to Trino was with 350. You upgrade to 353. At that stage, I think
we
had a couple of, like, the JDBC driver obviously was compatible, the CLI was compatible, but I'm sure like other tools haven't necessarily upgraded just yet. Then what are some of the challenges you face there, and what client tools are your users even using, or is that all hidden from them and you manage that?
Right. So there are a wide variety of clients we use. Like Laura mentioned about the different use cases like batch, real time, and things like that, right? So we have something called Azkaban, which is our open source scheduler for batch workloads. So that's one kind of client. We have analysts using Tableau and Elation kind of tools to query. There are other users who query from IntelliJ, Python clients or CLIs, our client, and we have our own notebook solution called Darwin. So there are wide variety of clients, and when upgrading from 333 to 352, that's a major one. We needed to make sure all of these clients continue to seamlessly work and talk to the Trino server. If there was any compatibility issues, I think that would have been an issue for us to upgrade all of these clients. But luckily, the power of standard APIs allowed us not to do any of those client upgrades.
Nice.
But
also like
is an issue.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Pratham wanted to.
Yeah. So I was just saying that like in open source, we now have like backward compatibility tests for clients and servers. So like it tests, I think, up to it tests, I think, every third version, going back to like the 5th version or something. So like a total of 15 versions would be covered. But there is one thing here that we have internally. Like for example, initially when we started using Presto, like not all the features we had in the open source driver. So we added some of those changes internally. And like for example, the prepared statements, initially Presto or Trino, it only supported like 4,000 characters because it's sent through the HTTP header. It has improved now, but at that time we were just kind of using an open source pull request that did not get merged, which sends the prepared statements in the header, in the body instead of the header. So like I think what is important when we make client-side changes is that like we have a clear path to migration to whatever the open source server and client is. Like a couple of upgrades back, we faced an issue with the incompatibility for some specific nested types, and like when we made some server-side changes, like it helped us to kind of make sure that what it will look like after a couple of releases, so that at some point you become like everything becomes compatible with whatever the open source is.
Yeah, so we had to take the route of having some internal patches on that same issue that Pratham mentioned. But then the open source kind of took a different route. And in order to now drop these patches, we would need to make sure the client protocol doesn't break. And that this is again one of the reasons why it's always good to align with open source first, and take that route rather than work with an internal patch.
Nice.
Yeah. So I think like Pratham probably briefly touched upon this earlier, but I think one of the other major challenge with the upgrade is the internal patches. They are always a nightmare. I mean, like whenever you work for a business, it's your goal is to integrate that product into your ecosystem and make sure you solve your business needs. But while you do that, most of those changes don't fit well into the open source framework, and they end up being as internal patches and lead to tech debt for the developers to maintain.
Yeah.
So, this is pretty common. Other open source projects have about thousands of such internal changes, which can't be merged upstream, or they are still lying internally. We are lucky to have it just about around 60 internal changes. And we were even constantly working on bringing that down before the upgrade, and we brought it down to 40. So, what kind of definitely helped Trino for our team with these changes was, one, Trino provides these extensible plugin framework. So that allowed, a lot of our internal changes to be developed as plugins, including, the authentication or logging or ACLs and UDFs and so on. And secondly, our philosophy, as Pratha mentioned, has been always to align with open source. So whenever we are working on a non-significant project, we always try to work with open source, try to get alignment on that, and then contribute it and then bring it back. So that has allowed us to keep these internal patches as low as possible.
So when you're talking about internal patches and stuff, I'm assuming basically what you're doing is you're maintaining an internal fork of Trino, and then the upgrade process means that you rebase to whatever version you're upgrading to, then you apply the patches again, and then you build the binaries. So then you can roll that out into your test cluster. And
we directly use the open source fork, but then there are always internal things that we need to integrate with the LinkedIn ecosystem. So those are the ones that we call as internal patches.
Yeah.
And the more you have, the more tech debt you build up over time.
Okay.
So I just want to add to what Akshay was mentioning. From going from Presto to Trino was almost like introducing completely new service to LinkedIn in terms of deployment efforts, because we had to rename the name at many levels, like simple things like email distribution list, Slack channels, and ACLs. And while we have to still run Presto, so eventually decomp the old names, but we have to maintain bring up the new service. Being as part of the deployment process, we should be able to roll back if needed. So
I want to really quickly bring up 9-inch Nick said, this is encouraging to hear how huge orgs like LinkedIn works with open source. So yeah, I totally agree. I think, having this kind of, in some ways, maybe smaller orgs or medium orgs are having difficulties, maybe trying to think, how do I actually apply this, or it won't apply to me. But there's a lot that can be pulled out of, I think, of an episode like this, that where you can actually kind of bring in a lot of the you can essentially bring in a lot of the wisdom. Essentially, that's for lack of a word, that you all are kind of bringing up in your experiences, because I mean, you all depend so heavily on Trino, and you're able to at this scale that you end up having a lot of insight to bring to a lot of people that are still kind of figuring out, how do I actually get this applied in the org? And so yeah, totally agree with you on that point. And that's actually Jan, coming from Jan Was. His title's 9-inch Nick, but it's Jan Was. so yeah.
Also, I think a good point he's making, and I think that's very encouraging to see how you as an organization, LinkedIn, are smart enough to understand how to work with an open source organization, and it's actually in your best interest to collaborate and be in sync and upgrade regularly. Many organizations don't understand that. They use open source projects, pull it in and fork it left, right, and center, and don't understand that they should upgrade, don't work with the community, and then later they get stuck and going like, well, what now? And then they think that open source is no good. But it's really because they're not mature enough in their processes and don't understand open source enough. You are a living and breathing example that it can work, and it is much better and it benefits everyone. So I love that. It's great.
Yep.
Right.
Totally.
It's not a one-time effort where you fork from open source and then work with it.
It's
effort where you continuously work with open source.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a long-standing relationship. Yeah, totally long-standing relationship for sure.
Yeah.
So
right.
great.
I think despite all these challenges, I think there are a couple of things that helped in general. One is, the power of stable APIs and standards that Trino follows, and like MVD and, the community strictly adhere to them. So for example, the ANSI SQL standard, we run more than, 2 million workloads every week. But when even making such a major upgrade after a year, we just didn't even have to migrate even 1% of the workload. So the queries, the user standards, because they follow SQL, they seamlessly work well whenever you upgrade, and we don't need to migrate them to other languages or other functions which are broken, and then you need to ask them to do a horizontal migration across all the teams. So we didn't have to do that. And the other example would be the JDBC APIs. They provide the standard interface for communication between client and server, and also for the exception mechanisms. So we initially thought, when a Presto exception would be renamed to a Trino exception, we would have to deal with the clients which are catching these Presto exceptions and then ask them to migrate. But who knew, like, all of these are JDBC clients, and JDBC already catches Presto exceptions and repackages them and throws them as SQL exception. So that saved us a horizontal. So the clients were already dealing with just SQL exceptions, and we didn't have to do any migration for that as well.
That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, this is I think one of the biggest points you're making too, is like, standards and particularly specifications. You can build around the spec, or you can build around a standard, especially something that is widely accepted. It's very useful once everybody's using it, and that everybody can build around that. And so this is it sounds like that's pretty central to you as well. And I think like that's really where the success for any good open source project, it all derives from the standards they build. So like Iceberg is another good example of that. They build around their specification. I think that is ultimately the thing that brings them a lot higher than the any of the competing table formats that are coming around them, is that they're like, okay, yeah, it's great that we make an implementation, but like, let's focus on the spec that we're actually building around. So
absolutely. Yeah. The other thing that helped us, this is advice from our past upgrades, that we rolled out changes very gradually to the cluster, starting from the smallest to the biggest, and spaced it out evenly, so that we could catch issues sooner. Although it's harder to catch all the issues on smaller clusters, but we did extensive testings on the smaller clusters, trying to capture any issues sooner and reduce the impact, and then slowly rolled it out to the bigger clusters. So despite all these challenges we talked about, by the time we were upgrading the biggest cluster, it went seamlessly, and we didn't have to do any rollback. And our philosophy was to roll back only if there was a major change. Otherwise, we only rolled forward. But we never came to that place where we had to consider rolling back.
Very cool. Very cool. Cool. Well, I mean, so I think that's definitely all that makes sense, and I'd like to take a moment to bring Jitesh up and kind of go into a little more of the specifics of the mechanics to the kind of overview of the discussion of this change. So Jitesh, would you kind of go into some of the specifics and how you all actually rolled these changes to go from Presto to Trino?
Yeah, surely. So the impact analysis that Akshay had briefly touched upon helped us to see like what changes would be required from in the ecosystem internally, etc. And one of the major tasks we had to start with was upgrading our build environment from JDK 8 to JDK 11. So with Presto 3.3.3, we were building in JDK 8, while the runtime was in JDK 11. Especially we had to do that because many of our internal Hadoop components were still on JDK 8. So with 3.5.2, we had to move to JDK 11. Many of the UDFs we used across Hadoop ecosystem, which were shared across Spark, Pig, Hive, and also used in Trino. They were also depending on JDK 8. And a few of these internal UDFs or plugins were using Trino internal APIs, which due to historic reasons, it was built like that. During the time these were built, I think 3 or 4 years ago, Trino's SPI wasn't as robust to have the functionality that these UDFs required. So at that time, it was decided to expose some of the internal APIs as SPI in LinkedIn internally. So whenever an upgrade happens, this would cause some issues for us because these are not stable, right? The internal APIs. SPIs would be pretty stable. So any change that happens in these internal APIs would be a burden or a cost for us to maintain during upgrade. So that was a challenge, and these teams, even though these UDFs were built like 3 years ago, many teams were not at a position to take up these tasks to upgrade this. So we ourselves have to go get into their code base and upgrade this. So Akshay helped work with these team and migrate all these UDFs into JDK 11. So these UDFs had to build for JDK 11 for Trino and JDK 8 for other components like Spark, Pig. That was one of the major challenge, and that took a lot of time for us. So learning from this was that to not use anything outside of XSPA for Trino plugins. Otherwise,
so have those changes that you added to the SPIs now been pulled out and are part of the official SPI now?
No. So the team is currently working to change these plugins to depend on SPI, and if SPI still doesn't have this functionality, they will work with the Trino open source and us to bring in those functionalities into the SPI.
Awesome, cool. Because that's a very useful feedback for us to know, right? Like what is useful to have in the SPI, and like typically those things, like for example, recently, obviously we added materialized views, and in order to enable materialized views, not just in one connector, we had to like do a whole bunch of stuff on the SPI for that. And for other use cases that are not necessarily always in our horizon, it'll be very useful to know. So I'm looking forward to hear from you about what you did there.
And the cool part about that too is like once you've added it for, like usually there's like a connector that drives the creation of that. So like another example outside of materialized views, materialized views is one of them. And then you also have like dynamic filtering. Like these were things that are initially started in the Hive connector. And now you can actually do this across like all these other connectors. It's kind of like you open the floodgates and then everybody else can kind of take advantage and say, hey, the hard work is on the internal, actual engine has been done now. So now I can just like, kind of piggyback on that effort and just, I want to have that same capability on my connector, let's just say Elasticsearch. So
yeah, it's like a nudge, right? Like it's like in the IDE when you're like, it's like suddenly the complete SPI implement thingy shows me more things.
Exactly. Yeah. So cool. That's definitely something we're interested in. I mean, any hints? I don't know if you guys are able to talk about it yet, but like anything in the area of like what some of these features are that you're like that aren't currently existing in the SPI today?
Maybe Akshay would know. Otherwise, they are still working. So these were developed about 3 years or so ago. None of us probably were not there at that point. So their team was looking into how best they can use the current SPI to bring that in.
Akshay, any do you know by chance?
I'm not too much familiar more than
no worries. But I don't want to put you on the spot.
I think we are internally using the SQL scalar interface, which is like a private interface right now. And we have one small patch to make that public, and that's how we were dealing with that issue when we were working. When that interface for the UDF was built about a year or more than a year back.
Cool. Got it. Cool. Yeah. So continue. I was just kind of
Sure.
tangent and kind of like the dog where it sees a squirrel. So
We didn't,
Yeah, so
you can't say we didn't warn them that that's going to happen when we chat.
that's exactly it.
yeah, so the other work was obviously renaming everything to Trino. So all the internal plugins, internal tooling, and also the documents, some of which Akshay touched up. So, and also branding had to be changed to Trino internally. So those were
Which is much
those
nicer branding, wouldn't you agree? It's got a little bunny.
Oh, yeah.
So a little less abstract and boring. So,
That's true.
cool. Yeah.
And
Cool.
one good thing is that clients didn't need to change anything from their side. So as promised by the PrestoSQL to Trino blog post, right? So at server side, we just set protocol v1 alternate header name to Presto and boom. Nothing needs to be changed from the client's point of view. Even though under the hood we were changing, making a major change.
So are you still running with this alternate header now?
Yeah, we are still running with this. So our plan is to migrate all the clients to Trino version, and that might take another 6 months or so. And once that is done, we will be able to retire this.
Got it. Cool. All right. Well, so from the broad, zooming out a little bit, like what was the kind of takeaways that you had from that whole experience? Like, is there, if you were to summarize, like what are the things, if you were advising anybody who's kind of on that verge now of sitting maybe at PrestoSQL 333 and they want to go up to get to the latest Trino, and you've all motivated them now. What's kind of the 3 things or 4 things that they need to remember?
Yeah, so the thing is, if you have not many internal patches, it is a breeze to actually upgrade from PrestoSQL to Trino. Given especially from this particular protocol v1 alternate header name, so clients wouldn't need to change anything. So it would be very equivalent to a PrestoSQL version upgrade.
Gotcha.
With respect to that. So and that's again want to hammer on the point that having less number of internal patches really is gonna help in our future upgrades.
Awesome. Yeah, that's I feel like so your kind of thing is like, do as many upgrades as possible. Like the general gist is upgrade as much as possible. Try to, if you can avoid it, keep any proprietary or custom code to a minimum. At least try to immediately make that something that gets a pull request or gets pulled back into the community. And then anything else outside of that those 2 bits?
Yeah, so with respect to the tasks involved in upgrade, we had other changes, like our conf management was scattered across, and we moved it to a templating method into a unified across clusters.
Okay.
And the testing also, right? So the testing involved was, so we had end-to-end internal testing. Not every test cases were automated here. So we are working thoroughly to automating these steps now, because if we want to do frequent upgrades, this has to be automated.
For sure.
Especially with integration with external components in the grid ecosystem, Hadoop ecosystem.
Nice.
So, and the other thing was like client testing. So we have internally JDBC, ODBC, and Python clients, and we need to verify that they won't be impacted. So we set up multiple test clusters, small test clusters, and connected these clients to them and verified that okay, these are working or not.
So we got go ahead.
Yeah, go.
So we got a question in from Ayush Bilala, and so he is asking, how about the clients connecting to Trino using the ODBC driver? Was there any specific change involved, or just setting the alternate header name work? Do you all use any ODBC drivers?
So we were, I think internally we are using Teradata's ODBC driver, and just setting the thing worked. The alternate header name worked.
Very good. Yeah, I know Ayush is he works on a lot of I think Azure type of infrastructure. So yeah, that makes sense. ODBC is a lot more prevalent for him. So
Right.
Thanks, Ayush. Good question. So okay, so you were talking, yeah. So client testing, making sure that you get that automated is yet another kind of like big piece to it. Making sure that as you start trying to get into this regular cadence, that you're catching any potential any bugs that you've introduced or anything that say that you're unfortunately maybe you have to have a couple patches if those are experiencing any issues based on the updated code.
So with regards to the client testing and stuff, what's your interaction model with the users? Like, do they all know you're the Trino team and you know all about SQL and you support them and you have like a little internal web page and whatever and contact address, or are you just hidden, or how does that all work?
Yeah, so we have internal web page and we also have Slack channel. So any user, if they are having issues, they will be able to contact us via that. Okay. And the bulk of the clients would be using JDBC drivers for applications, JDBC and Python, ODBC for, let's say, for example, Tableau, etc. So these were like tested in bulk. Like the owners of these applications would be contacted and scheduled a test with them.
Cool. So do you have anything else you wanted to cover before we move on to the next section, Jitesh?
Yeah, Pratham, you want to talk about a little about the client testing? Otherwise, I can.
I think feel free to go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So the other thing was that we had a staging cluster and we deployed in there. So one of the interesting things we found out was that so when we did this rename from Presto to Trino, we had a couple of UDFs also renamed, but then the Coral, which is the Hive view translation layer, was still depending on the old Presto name, and that was caught in the staging cluster, and we had to revert some of the renames done for these UDFs. So that was interesting.
So for the client upgrades, sorry to interrupt, but for the client upgrades, I think earlier we mentioned we have the Presto query completed event. We can track which users or which connections are on what version of client. That was very useful information to chase the users, work with the users to upgrade the clients. So the event listener dump is helped there to identify the clients and upgrade them prior to the upgrade, server-side upgrade.
Very good. And do you still, even after you've upgraded, have you caught anything like any clients still like sneaking in like, oh, we forgot that we lost this one, or this kind of problem still?
In fact, so at our scale, we still find issues even after a robust testing, and this is like we were for example, some of the things were suboptimal performance for replicated join with the new version. So this we will be discussing in the next session soon.
Cool.
And the other one was like V1 info was authenticated in 333. Whereas it in between 333 and 352, one of the versions stopped authenticating this, and we were depending on this authentication for validating user credentials during client connection creation. And even though we did this testing, the JDBC client testing in our test environment, this was not caught during that, because this is not a quickly. If the user were passing in the right password, this will not be caught. Yeah. So in our testing, users were sending right password, and it went through. So this was caught in production, and we had to re-authenticate, enable authentication in V1 info. We have currently opened a ticket, Jira internally, and an issue in the Trino DB for fixing this. Then there was a UI hang issue. So this was when when one of the queries throw exceptions, which are not exceptions, like rather errors, like class loading errors. When we start looking at the UI would hang. So this we had to put an internal patch, and later we found out that same thing was fixed later in the 354 or some 353 or 354. So
so you'll be upgrading here shortly then, right?
Surely, yeah. Yeah, one other thing, after upgrading the clusters, we were watching the UI to see if there are like any user errors happening or any type of errors that are due to the upgrade. And we found out one user who was using approx percentile getting into throwing errors. And we investigated and found out that so there was some changes in the approx percentile in implementation. So it is more accurate and efficient in the newer version. But it is also indeterministic and does not handle nans or infinite values. So this particular dataset had those infinite, like not a number values, which was causing this. So we contacted this particular user, saying, "Okay, your error is due to this," and they were happy. We provided a alternate method, QDigest aggregation, so they were happy with that.
Good.
So these were the interesting things, issues that had happened after upgrade.
Nice. Very cool. Anything else?
After the upgrade, we clearly saw latency improvement. So we couldn't, scientifically quantify the improvement, primarily because at that time we had to split the user base, like the cluster usage, to a new cluster as well due to the growth. But excluding that split traffic, we saw like 20% plus improvement in the latency histograms. So that is a huge benefit with this upgrade.
That's awesome. Yeah, especially like I know that as Manfred was mentioning before, we've seen across the board, since a lot of people are on containers, this even more drastic jump than that. But even 20% is huge. So
yeah,
great. Great. Well, without further ado, we're kind of hitting in on some time right now. Unless there's something else you wanted to cover before we move on to the next part, Jitesh.
Nothing much. So the learning says upgrade more frequently. We want to do at least not more than 6 months to wait for the upgrade. Ideally, for every quarter we should upgrade. So for that we would need automated testing. So we are heavily working towards that, and we hope to have one upgrade every quarter in within 6 months to 1 year time.
Awesome.
And like everyone else mentioned, removal of internal patches has to be a prerequisite for frequent upgrades.
Nice.
As well.
Cool. So upgrade more frequently, automate, and then remove as much internal code as you possibly can to keep things running smoothly. Yeah.
We'll have them at least in plugins, right? So
that's also true. Great. Well, with that, let's go ahead and move on to the PR of the week. So for this PR of the week, let me pull up this. Here we go. And I'm going to. There we go. Skip Jitesh there. So we're actually cheating a little bit this week. We're actually going to be covering a future PR of the week. So this PR is actually something that is still an ongoing investigation right now at LinkedIn, and Jitesh and Pratham are going to be explaining us a little bit about this issue and that they kind of found. And so I think this was kind of something we wanted to do this way this week because it's like a really cool subject. It's just, I think a lot of people are really interested in kind of hearing about how to optimize joins. So that's what we're actually going to be covering today. But then the I forgot my B. I also had a B, but I think the B is that that we want to kind of get an understanding of like what the actual the process is whenever you're trying to kind of even formulate the pull request. Some people maybe just think, oh well, this or I'm going to put up an issue and say I found something, and then you just know immediately what to do. It's not certain PRs kind of take a little more consideration, a little more research, and so I always think that those that kind of take at least this could be on the, I'm not sure how, Jitesh, how many months or weeks have you spent so far on kind of investigating this?
No, I think we have spent some couple of weeks time on and off on this because yeah.
So this isn't one of those things where you're like, oh, okay, we are, this is clearly this change that we have to make, and like this. These are one of those kind of changes where, you're really gonna have to start digging into a lot of the metrics that we were talking about before, doing all sorts of dumps and trying to figure out, is this coming over a particular, like, what's the context essentially that leads us to these issues? So without further ado, Jitesh, why don't you go ahead and kind of cover what this PR does? Do you want me to? I can actually keep this up, or I can actually open up the pull request itself. Just let me know. I'll drive, and you tell me what you need to see.
I think Pratham, you could give a background on this, what is happening, and I can briefly go through what happened in our system, what we found out, and later after that, Pratham will be able to describe like what is the best way moving forward for this. Go ahead, Pratham.
Sure.
Awesome.
Yeah. So at a high level, I think what we have observed is like a lot of these issues that we see, like they are just like combinations of like edge cases that finally manifest as a problem with whatever the query performance, or even if it's a query failure. So even here, like it's the same case. So in LinkedIn, we have a lot of views, and there is an interesting use case where we want to migrate some tables. Like the old table is in some other format, and the new table is more optimized. So in order to not impact the queries, what you would do is just create a view on top of two tables, the old one and the new one. So if the query is fetching data before a certain date, then you would contact the old table. Otherwise, it would be from the new table. So that's how the view definition is set. And like when we did the 352 upgrade, we saw issues with a specific query type, which is more common in LinkedIn maybe, that involves this kind of views joined with a very small table. So there is a join node, and on one side we have this view, and on the second hand we have a table which has like 16 or 17 rows. So the query is displayed below here. So select star from V where X in Z. So that is like a subquery, but you don't see that as a semi-join because it gets translated to an inner join. So finally, all this is doing is just doing a join between a view and a table, and we have a predicate on the date, which is in the view schema. Yeah, Jitesh, do you want to pick it up?
So I did get a quick comment from Ashar saying every line of code is a cost, actually. So interesting way to look at it. Oh, he's just making a quick comment. I thought it was a question. So anyways, very interesting. Go ahead, Jitesh.
Brian, if you could go to the
let's bring this
the
up.
issue,
and I will zoom in here a little bit so that you can actually see. Here we go. How's that look?
So this query was taking like 39 or 40 seconds before the upgrade, and after the upgrade, it took like 35 minutes, and that's like a 50 times slowness compared to PrestoSQL 333. So essentially, what was happening is in PrestoSQL 352, we had this query run as a replicated join. So the right side table had about 17 rows, left side has a view, and one side of the view had the all the data coming from, and the other side was empty. And the data from the view had billions of rows. Like, so here we can see it is like 86 billion rows joined against 17 rows, and this was a replicated join. But the problem is this particular stage 2 was executed on a single task or a single node. So that means the entire 86 billion row had to be funneled through this particular node to do this replicated join. Whereas in PrestoSQL 333, version 333, for which the plan is below this, and in this it runs as a partitioned join, similar thing. But the difference is in here, the stage 2 runs on 100 tasks or 100 nodes, which is the hash partition count property. So obviously this will be running much faster. So from a higher level, even though we are joining against a huge table with a smaller table, which should ideally be replicated and work efficiently, but the result was going on the other way. Replicated join was pretty slow. So this is what we observed. We observed that this change came in as part of one of the PR, in I think version 342, PR 5141, and we temporarily disabled this internally and brought back the performance to the previous levels, and also started investigating why this would be the case. Probably Pradham, you wanna take over, discuss what we found out.
Sure. Yeah, so like if you look at the left-hand side of the join, there are 2 stages, and essentially there are 2 tables. So they are the same 2 tables that we saw in the view definition. One of them represents older date partitions, and the second one represents newer ones. So like if you look at the query filter, it says that like give me data after like 8th of June. And can you go up so that we can reference back?
Oh, this.
Can you go back
Even
up?
further.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. So here the query says that like give me data after 8th of June, right? So logically, like the old table is completely useless here because like it has data from like before 5th of June. So ideally, what should happen is like the old node, it should just get pruned, right? You don't need to have that. And that is exactly what is happening here. Like if you go down to the plan.
Which one?
The second one. Yeah, can you keep going down? Yeah, so here the first stage, stage 3, has a values node, right? So it's not scanning any table because it doesn't need to, because those partitions are not there. But here there is one more optimization that we can do, which is basically taking a union of a scan filter project and an empty values node. We could just replace that with just a scan node. So the values node doesn't need to come in the picture. And interestingly, the same optimization was added in one of the PRs by Martin. I don't remember that number, but it says something like remove empty branches of union. Yeah, I think it's
7832.
Where's it? I thought I had it here. 7832.
Yeah, so this PR essentially simplifies the set operation by like removing the empty branches, but it still did not help us because of the nature of the filter. So the way optimizer operates right now, it executes a bunch of optimizers one after the other. And because the filter here is not simple, like it cannot be represented as a simple domain, Trino doesn't realize initially that like I don't have any partitions corresponding to this filter for this particular table. The realization only happens when the exchanges are added, which is much later. And that's why we end up with these two stages still. Like one of them is values, which could have been pruned if that particular optimizer executed in.
Yeah. I think this is also like an issue that I remember us bringing up with Iceberg a while back, Manfred, like the issue that you can't get information from the physical disk while you're making the plan. And so there's like, you have this issue where you're trying to make some sort of plan based on the physical layouts or different pieces. And to do that, you have to actually like start the query beforehand. And so there's just,
it's not the complete knowledge at the start always, right? So.
Yeah, so it's making a guess at this point. Yeah,
I think like if we like restructure the optimizer orders a bit, like we may be able to fix this. And
yeah,
so
and
basically, go ahead.
Yeah, and the desired query plan shape is below this diagram. Yeah, so this so here stage 2 executes the replicated, and also scan filter project happens in the same thing, and this will run across all the nodes in the cluster, let's say 100 plus or 500 or how many ever nodes you have. So that will speed up the query much. It will become much faster than what we have with partition join today.
And you could do this, I guess, through some, and this is where my lack of understanding of the optimizer, but like this should be able to be done with like a particular heuristic, or
so the capability is already there, but like we don't process these predicates early in the optimizer. And like one of the old PRs I found, it mentions that it is because of performance reasons. So like if we start processing such complex predicates earlier during optimization, then the optimizers after that will be able to leverage that information and prune these nodes.
Gotcha. Cool. Okay. Well, is there anything else you all wanted to cover on the PR before we hop on over to the question of the week?
I think we are good.
Good?
I think it definitely sounds like this is going to be an interesting, pretty deeply technical discussion to figure out, because if you pull that load forward into the planning, then it happens on the coordinator versus things happening partially split up on the workers, right? So that's maybe where some of this comes from as well. So should definitely be a very deep technical discussion to figure out how to approach this.
Yeah.
I think we'll start a discussion in the dev channel.
Yeah.
So far, like Jitesh is looking into like what are the possible approaches, but the simple one seems to me that like we can get around by adding another invocation for more complex predicate push down into the connector.
Nice.
Cool.
All right. Well, without further ado, let's go on to the question of the week. All right. I'm gonna let's see. Pull down Jitesh and Pratham. So, question of the week, pretty straightforward. This is actually this is asked a couple of times, and we do offer the, as we had kind of mentioned before, and we've already kind of answered it to some degree already just by talking about some of the contributions of LinkedIn as before. So the question is, how can I query the Hive views that I created basically in Hive and do this from Trino? And so a lot of people that are kind of new to the Trino project, this wasn't it sounds like something that you should be able to do out of the box because Hive has SQL and Trino uses SQL, so shouldn't this just work, right? And so this is actually where Coral was brought in to actually address this, because in fact, it is not the case. Hive actually has its own dialect whenever they use SQL. Although they use kind of a SQL-esque type language, there are a decent amount of custom keywords that have been added to the language, as well as other particular functions and pieces that just does not directly translate from one system to the other system, right? So particularly Hive just doesn't follow an ANSI standard, and so there are just going to be a lot of different SQL that's allowed in that language where it's just going to be violating those standards. And so in order to have something that can go from the Hive, basically a query that you're running on Hive, and move that over into something that is equivalent to a Trino cluster, you can have this capability to transpile the languages, kind of similar to what you do when you're maybe transpiling from, like, let's say a C code to some other, let's say, I don't know, Java code or something like that. There are ways in which you can represent the language in the abstract syntax tree, and then compile it back out into the other language. And so that's more or less what Coral is taking care of. It's using internally the internal representation and code that is provided by Apache Calcite, but then taking it to a specific language of Hive, Trino, and various other query engines. And so actually I'm going to pull let me see. I'm not sure if Pratham or Jitesh, I'm going to pull on you actually right now. Am I totally butchering this Coral thing, or anything you'd like to add to what I just kind of said to describe Coral?
Yeah, so it takes in the query that is stored as part of the Hive view, and does the relevant translations from, for us in case of Trino, it will translate from the Hive SQL's specific use case into this ANSI SQL types. Also, if there are like UDFs available, so those will be translated as well into the Coral side. So into the Trino side, and also this translation works across the other engines as well, like
Spark or awesome. Yeah, so
for users of Trino, by the way, that want to take advantage of that, it's just a catalog property. So it's like hive.translate Hive views in your catalog, and you set that to true.
Yep.
And then you get that Coral based algorithm.
Yeah. So by default, it is disabled. So if you are trying to read from a view, you might get an error message, but then all that it takes is that you just basically will turn that on. Yeah. So we covered this in some more detail in episode 18. I pulled if you want to, this goes episode 18 if you're interested in kind of how Coral works, but specifically how views in general work for Trino. You should definitely check out this episode 18. We get it in a little more nitty gritty as to the different types of views that are supported, including not just Hive connector, but also the Iceberg connector. So in that, I kind of to differentiate all the different things actually going on when you're talking to different views, I made various set of sequence diagrams. And so if you see here, initially you'll have and again, you can reference this sequence diagram in the show notes if you're listening. I created you'd say you create this view called Hive_view. That simply updates something in the metastore, in the Hive metastore, because again, this is a logical view versus a materialized view. And then you basically get confirmation that gets created. Then from Trino, now that you have this view that exists in Hive, what's basically going to happen is you'll select from that Hive view. Once you kind of did the step that Manfred just mentioned, you enabled this, and then it's actually going to go get this the query that was stored there within this view. Since it's a logical query, you're not actually storing any of the data that comes back when you run it. You're basically just running this fresh query each time. So what Trino will then do is pull that query from the metastore and pull that back. Now that if you notice, this line here is yellow. This is actually still in the Hive syntax. So what has to happen is this translate step that goes for Coral. It basically just translates the Hive language into Trino language, and at that point, the original query that was stored in the Hive syntax now gets translated over into Trino syntax. And then at that point, you do your typical things. You plan the query, retrieve the data, return the data. And so that's ultimately, if you want to actually still be able to query those Hive views, if you weren't even aware that you weren't able to, well, now you're not able to unless you actually enable this feature. And this is the part that's actually utilizing that library that was pulled up by LinkedIn. So with that, I do want to kind of finish this out. Let's go ahead and pull up everybody one last time. So thanks everybody for joining us. This is our biggest our biggest panel, I guess you could say this is that we've had. So we thank you all for kind of coming and explaining how things work at scale at LinkedIn. And so Jitesh, do you have anything you'd like to share before we part?
Yeah, it's been great. I think we had this was a good platform to share our thoughts, the philosophy behind how we develop internally in Trino and generally in LinkedIn. So pretty happy to be part of this, and thank you very much.
Super glad to have you on. And Akshay, anything you'd like to share before we part?
Thank you so much for having us here. This was a good journey for us, upgrading to Trino and then sharing these learnings with the community.
Okay, for sure. Yeah, no, it's so great having you. Laura, anything you'd like to share before we hop off?
No, just want to say thank you to you and Manfred for having us. It's our pleasure to be here. It's first time for me to be on live.
Yes,
you did good.
Yeah, for sure, you did great.
Exciting experience.
Awesome. Pratham, what do you got for us?
Thanks for having us, and thanks to all the viewers and also future viewers, I guess.
For sure. Raju, anything you'd like to say before we part?
Yes, this is a great platform. Thank you both for providing us this platform, not just for us, for the entire Trino community.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining us. Manfred, anything you'd like to say before we hop off today?
I think this was 22, new record. 2 hours, man.
Yeah. I think we made it all the way to episode 22, 2 hours. Yeah, new record we made it to. Well, it was a pleasure to have you all. Thank you all, and we'll definitely have to have another LinkedIn show within the next year or so. And keep up to date on what you all have going on over there. So thanks again, and everybody that's listening in, thank you all for watching. If you've made it all this long, kudos to you. So we'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Music for the show is from the Mega Man 6 gameplay album by Krzysztof Sławikowski. Don't forget to give us a star on the Trino repository at github.com/TrinoDB/Trino. And for more information on future shows and to find show notes, check out trino.io/broadcast.